They found the photographs like breadcrumbs on the Appalachian Trail, dozens of Polaroids bright as teeth, their white borders unscuffed, their chemistry still wet enough to ghost a thumbprint. Every frame held the same man at different landmarks in Great Smoky Mountains National Park. Smiling at Clingman's Dome, waving from Laurel Falls, standing easy in Cade's Cove, like he'd stepped out for a postcard and walked into a legend. Ordinary snapshots, except for the detail that turns breathing into a learned skill. In every picture, the man casts two shadows, one obedient to the sun, the other reaching the wrong way, as if light had developed a second opinion. The tour guide who found them didn't want to recognize the face, but she did. Harold Brennan. He disappeared in these mountains in 1987. They held services. They issued a death certificate. They found what they said was his body at the bottom of a ravine 36 years ago. And yet the date stamps on the Polaroids say yesterday. The film stock code says it was manufactured last month. That film went out of production in 1992. Hold on to that second shadow. You're going to see it again. When Ranger Marcus radioed dispatch, the operator, Jennifer Mills, heard 12 years of hard cases crowding behind his voice. Bear maulings, hypothermia, lost hikers who ran from the rescue lights. She asked for the plate on the abandoned vehicle. He read it off, registered to Robert Denning, and then the radio fell quiet. 3 separate rangers had reported Denning in distress that same week, each call from a different coordinate, each sighting at the same time. The 3 points 30 miles apart. Marcus checked the car twice to be sure. Same name on the registration. Same wallet photo of a wife and 2 kids. Same grocery receipt from a Tuesday that hadn't happened yet. The Smokies don't need help creating a mood. The range rolls like ancient vertebrae along the spine of the east. A long-breathing animal shrouded by its own weather. The haze, that blue smoke the Cherokee named Chaconage. The place of blue smoke spills from plant chemistry into moisture and hangs there, softening every edge until distance looks like memory. Humans have walked these ridges for more than 1,000 years, leaving their cairns and stories under a canopy thick enough to hold. Noon at arm's length. The national park opened in 1934 and took shape not from empty federal lands, but from thousands of private properties, title deeds unwilling, eminent domain blunt as an axe. Generations of families were told to pack their lives into wagons and let the forest take back what it could swallow. Records say 200 mountain people were displaced. Locals say the count misses those who lived by handshake and family promise since before the war split the country. Entire communities slipped beneath leaf litter and vine. The kudzu is a patient archivist. The rhododendron hides what it protects. Walk long enough and you'll step into Walker Valley, one of the communities erased in ink and replanted in green. 73 families lived there, with a school, 2 churches, a general store, and graves whose names weathered down to initials. When archaeologists surveyed the area in 2018, they logged foundations not in any ledger. Structures built with stone joints that locked without mortar. Angles that disagree with the eye. They photographed everything. In the lab, half the pictures developed into empty forest. Beams that stood like ribs in memory vanished on paper. The field notes don't say it out loud, but the margins do. We were sure these were there. The land trains its own illusions. Valleys trap cold air while warmer currents skate above, and the difference bends sound like saplings in wind. You can hear a conversation from a ridge over and miss your name spoken at your shoulder. A storm can find you under a blue sky and leave you as quickly, carrying its thunder to someone else who wasn't expecting rain. 100 tree species stack their leaves into a roof so thick that some hollows stay in twilight, even when your watch insists on noon. Under that dim ceiling live 200 kinds of birds, 66 mammals, and an uncountable choir of insects. Their chorus is messy and maddening until it isn't. Rangers call it the pause. The forest turns its volume to zero. No birds, no insects, not the smallest breath of foliage. The air holds its lungs for exactly 7 minutes, and then, click, life resumes. Like a record lifted and set back down with surgical care. The location shifts, the hour wanders, the duration does not. Trail cameras cover the usual excuses. The animals continue to move, mouths open in song, wings beat, deer startle and run, yet the microphones log nothing. Silence, it seems, selects its audience. Before anyone built ranger stations, the Cherokee cut trails that still quietly decide where modern roads go. Their stories are tied to this soil as securely as old roots. They speak of the Nunehai, the people who can appear where you need them or not at all. The Uktena, a serpent with a crystal in its brow that lures the eye and swallows the body. Places where the old laws still apply, where time is like water that eddies and catches. In 1978, medicine man Robert Bushyhead described hollows where the wise don't go after dark. He didn't name them. Some doors don't deserve hinges. You can hike a ridge and find a stand of trees wounded by something with scales. The gouges spiraling 30 feet up in a pattern that repeats like it solved an equation you've never learned. The official answer is bears. Bears climb, bears scratch. Bears do not scratch in Fibonacci across half a grove overnight. Then came settlers, who were only partly interested in joining the century. The terrain sorted the sociable from the solitary, and kept the latter in hollows where granny women midwifed, healed and warned, where water witching was less a superstition than a skill you'd rather have than mock. Their stories weren't told for spooks around a fire. They were maps disguised as warnings, places where compasses faltered, where cattle refused to graze, where hunters who went alone were not alone for long. Martha Whitmore, born in 1892, was one of the last granny women who spoke plainly. Her granddaughter recorded her in 1971. Martha talked about thin places, where you hear music from nowhere, a fiddle song that calls you into rooms that shouldn't exist. People followed it. They came back in hours with hair turned white and eyes that looked too young for the faces they were in. They described halls filled with dancers who smiled and cast no shadows at all. During Prohibition, the mountains made their own economy. Stills hid under the cover of sound and fog, and revenue agents learned how easy it is to get lost without moving. In 1928, Agent Theodore Wilkins disappeared for 4 days, hunting still near Cades Cove. He swore he'd missed supper by a couple hours, grew furious when shown the calendar, and chose California as if the state line could cure a mountain's interest in him. Another agent, Samuel Garrett, filed a report that went immediately dark under classification. It has since surfaced. A cave that isn't on any survey, still large enough to supply a city. A liquor that glowed. Stranger still were the workers. All the same face, the same posture, the same look of a man copied more times than vanity should allow. When Garrett brought a team, the cave was a wall. Federal oversight came with the park and brought paperwork, which has its own way of telling stories when it thinks nobody is looking. Freedom of information requests pull decades of oddities into daylight. Between 1940 and 1960, at least 17 separate reports mentioned structures that don't appear on maps. Visitors walked into cabins with steam rising from bowls on a set table, washed on the line, gardens ready to feed a family. They went for rangers and returned to nothing but leaf litter and the oldest kind of dust. A crew in 1953 building a trail near Mount Sterling found just such a cabin. Inside, the food was hot. The floor's dust didn't know what a footprint was. They took pictures. The developed film shows a bare room with a thick coat of time. No bowls, no steam. In one corner of one picture, almost a joke of a detail, a shadow stands just outside the frame where no one remembers standing. June 1962 gave the park the Helms case, and the file doesn't close even when you snap it shut. David and Margaret Helms reported their 7-year-old Patricia missing at 4:30 p.m. near Tremont. Searchers found her 6 hours later, a quarter-mile away, as the crow flies and impenetrable if you respect terrain. She said she'd been gone for days. She described staying with the old woman under the mountain in a cabin lit by oil lamps, rafters hung with herbs, and walls covered in symbols her tongue didn't know. She named a demolished logging camp. She named families who left before she was born. Psychologists found no coaching. Patricia kept a stone the woman gave her and kept the secret of the book. Pages full of photographs of people she would meet, including her husband, years before she knew what kind of person she'd be. She still has the stone. Geologists have a word for everything. They don't have one for this. Modern tools illuminate and embarrass equally. Satellite images read heat signatures where nothing is built. GPS units don't just lose lock. They return coordinates that place you miles from where you stand. Like the mountain is willing to compromise on where you are, if you'll only meet it halfway. In 2015, a University of Tennessee team studied magnetic behavior in zones that shouldn't change and found fields that do. Published findings connect those zones to places Cherokee oral tradition flags as thin. What didn't make the journal has been whispered in notes and hallways. Equipment that measured something like temporal drag. Digital clocks that gained or lost minutes while their mechanical twins held steady. Or the opposite, always in the same places, like time keeps a favorite path. They mapped 43 of those points before the money stopped, and the questions multiplied. Search and rescue reports hide their strangest truths in the average. About a dozen missing persons a year, most found within 3 days. Then the outliers, 2 or 3 cases that refuse to make sense. People discovered miles from last known location with no memory of travel. Hikers found in places you can't reach on foot with the time you have. Children recovered at heights adults fear with ropes. Adults returned wearing clothes that aren't theirs and aren't right for the century. Since 1971, 14 recovered persons were wearing garments that belonged to nobody living. Vintage pieces in perfect condition. A child in 1984 wore a dress from the 1920s, with a crisp receipt in the pocket, from a store that closed in 1931. A hiker in 2001 wore a Union uniform with papers dated 1863 that passed authenticity tests, even as carbon dating insisted they were made last week. Say his name softly, and the forest thins around your voice. Dennis Martin, June 14, 1969, Spence Field, 6 years old. A game of hide-and-seek that forgot to give back one of the players. The largest search in park history followed. 1,400 people, helicopters, and a Green Beret team on exercises who came because they could. A family 6 miles away saw a rough-looking man moving too fast, carrying what looked like a child over terrain a goat would judge. By the time searchers reached the ridge, all that remained were the old questions. The official reports don't mention what one soldier swore in. 2015 footprints with a stride 12 feet long that stop in the middle of a clearing like the walker stood still and didn't. He described a child's shoe fused into a trunk 15 feet off the ground. In a way, biology doesn't have a verb for former Ranger Sarah. Dutton kept 2 sets of records, the ones the office needed and the ones the night demanded. From 1988 to 2003, she worked at the park and learned what an unofficial protocol feels like. She logged 19 places where the world misaligned. Temperature drops by 20 degrees in a breath. Radios turned to static and stayed that way. The body sense of being watched by something that understands you are the anomaly. In 1994, she found a grove where every tree bent at the same angle, all pointing toward a central depression whose floor held stones arranged in a pattern that hurt to perceive, not to look at, to perceive, like your eyes wanted more dimensions than your skull would host. She brought a team the next day. The trees were straight. The depression was gone. Everyone who entered that grove dreamed the same dream that night, falling upward into a sky full of eyes. September 1996, near Ramsey Cascades, she answered reports of lights and walked into a geometry lesson the mountain didn't intend to explain. Trees grew in perfect spirals with bark stripped in mathematical ladders. At the center stood a structure built from stones that didn't belong to any geologist's map. She photographed the site from angles that should have been boring and weren't. The next day, the forest pretended it had always been ordinary. The camera timestamps said the pictures were taken on dates not yet lived. Folklore professor James Whitmore has collected 4 decades of accounts from pilots, hikers, biologists, soldiers, and people who wish they'd never learned to spell the word credible. Patterns repeat. People in clothing 10, 60, 100 years out of date who dissolve when you close the distance. Machinery sounds in the wilderness where there's no right of way for engines. Voices that call names that don't belong to anyone within 2 counties. Most common of all, lost time. Hours that fold into minutes. Minutes that unspool into days. Whitmore maps events and finds temporal echoes. A man in a yellow raincoat falls from Laurel Falls. Families in 1973, 1981, and every 8 years since have watched him strike rock and vanish. The man has been falling for half a century and does not age between impacts. If you think this is only a catalogue of hauntings, watch how modernity behaves when it goes missing. March 2017. Brandon Schaefer, an engineer from Nashville, day hiking the Alum Cave Trail. His car sat where it should. 2 weeks later, his phone turned up near the summit of Mount LeConte with photographs he couldn't have taken, angles that would require flight, images of the trail system from vantage points that don't exist. Several photos show Schaefer himself from distances that imply another photographer. He was alone. The final image corrupted itself like it had something to hide, then revealed itself to people who insisted on asking. It shows a structure built out of impossible, hallways that recede inward forever, passages that bend without turning, a space that refuses to be measured. Forensic work enhanced the image and found figures in the depths, hundreds of them, all facing the camera. One in the foreground is Schaefer. Metadata says the shot was taken 3 days after he disappeared, while teams were still shouting his name into fog. He was found 3 months later in Virginia, hundreds of miles away with boots worn for less than 10. He quit his job. He sold his life. He moved to Alaska and stopped taking calls. In 2022, his sister said he kept a journal and filled it with one sentence: "They're all still there." When asked who they were, he said the mountain collects people, not bodies, people, and keeps what looks like them in places between the real trails until someone takes their place. In mountain towns like Cosby, people don't accumulate ancestors so much as consult them. Ruby Lawson learned the rules at a kitchen table. Don't whistle after dark. Don't follow a voice that knows your name. Don't bring home what you didn't lose. The mountains remember everything. Sometimes they show you the before, sometimes the next. Her grandmother marked a paper map with hand-drawn X's where timelines tangle. You might see your own grave, Ruby says, as if mentioning rain. You might meet your great-grandchild. She keeps a photograph from 1932 of her great-grandmother standing beside a ranger. In the background sits a modern SUV that wouldn't be manufactured for 70 years. The license plate is readable. When somebody ran the number in 2019, it came back registered to a vehicle that entered the park that same day. The owner was never logged as leaving. Ask the agencies and you'll get the kind of silence that knows your questions by heart. FOIA reveals maps with administratively closed zones that resist public justification. Satellite tiles over those areas blur in ways image scientists say aren't weather, cloud, or sensor error. In 2018, a drone hobbyist named Mitchell Crawford posted footage of one such zone. The video is easy to find if you know where archives keep the things people tried to delete. It shows structures that phase in and out of visibility, like a building learning to breathe. The channel vanished. 2 weeks later, so did Crawford. At 3 a.m., his roommate watched him leave on camera. 3 minutes later, the same camera shows him come back through the roommate. Both bodies unbothered, like the footage was overlaid and forgot to tell the walls. Stay too long in certain places, and you don't just collect stories. You collect symptoms. Psychiatrist Patricia Vance treated park staff and regulars between 2001 and 2015, and labeled what she saw as Smoky Mountain Syndrome. Dreams of rooms that don't exist, knowledge of incidents you didn't witness, visions shared by strangers who can match each other's drawings. 5 patients who never met described a stone chamber beneath Klingman's dome, symbols that moved when watched, and a low sound like the mountain learning how to breathe. One maintenance worker sketched a cave system that wasn't on any survey. 2 years later, geologists found exactly that system. Inside, GPS units from the 1990s, cameras from 2010, all powered, all filled with data from trips that were happening now. Photos of people who hadn't yet stood where the pictures said they were. Videos of events scheduled months in the future. Vance's office was robbed in December 2015. Cash stayed. Drugs stayed. Only the files walked out the door, carried by silhouettes who turned their faces from every lens. The investigation closed the way doors do when rooms run out of light. In 2021, a team of physicists from Oak Ridge National Laboratory entered the park under the quietest kind of permission. Their equipment measured quantum fluctuations, the restless heartbeat beneath matter itself. The data vanished into classification the moment it was recorded. One of the researchers, speaking behind a voice filter later, said they found zones where the constants don't stay constant, where the math that holds the universe together bends a little, just enough to whisper that maybe there are more universes watching back. He described places where causality frays, where time seems to forget which direction it's supposed to move. It's the kind of phrase that sounds poetic until you realize he meant it literally. The arrow of time splits. That's how you explain Dana Morrison. Dana was a park volunteer, not prone to hysteria, known for keeping her boots cleaner than anyone else's. On November 3rd, 2022, she disappeared for 14 hours. When they found her, she thought she'd only been gone a few minutes. She was calm. She described the searchers' approach before they arrived. She described in exact detail a car accident 20 meters away, an accident that hadn't happened yet. Then the accident started to line up with her words. A tree fell exactly where she'd said it would. A bear attacked a camper on the date she'd named. Human remains from a 1978 case were found where she'd quietly marked them on a map. When reporters asked her about it, she just said, "I saw how thin the walls really are. The mountains are stacked versions of themselves. Every story's still happening, just in another layer. And something in those layers notices when we notice it. She doesn't hike anymore." After Morrison, the sky over the Smokies began to hum. In January 2023, hikers filmed unmarked helicopters hovering at night over restricted coordinates, their beams slicing the mist like white knives. The Department of Defense denied flights. The Department of Energy offered no comment. The National Park Service issued a single, terse statement. All operations within park boundaries follow standard safety protocols. And yet, more trails quietly closed. Maps changed overnight. Campgrounds once open for decades suddenly marked environmental restoration zones. When the coordinates are overlaid against internal ranger maps, everyone matches a cluster of recorded anomalies. Even the satellites seem uneasy. Areas that once rendered in sharp relief now appear pixelated or blurred. Like the forest itself refuses to be photographed, still, the stories leak through. An Ohio family traveling by GPS in the summer of 2023 was directed down a side road that didn't exist on any printed map. They followed it anyway, past the signposts until it widened into a town. Ridgeway. A neat grid of streets, white porches, grocery stores, people waving from sidewalks as if guests were expected. They spent the evening there, eating pie in a diner lit by Edison bulbs and a jukebox that played music older than the paint was new. The next morning, they tried to drive back. The road ended in a forest. Their GPS log was empty. Cell service showed no trace of the route. Historians will tell you Ridgeway was abandoned in 1931, just before the park's creation. The family described power lines, modern cars, televisions, and residents who talked about COVID-19, while insisting the year was still 1931. They took pictures. The photos show only trees. But in the car window reflections, Ridgeway stands solid as a memory that refuses to leave. At the University of Kentucky, a group of graduate students studying salamanders made a find that rewrote what their textbooks called possible. Deep in the slope caves, they discovered petroglyphs, carvings that no known language matches. The figures show modern machines beside ancient symbols, as if time had lost track of itself. Charcoal samples returned two dates, one thousands of years old, another decades in the future. When they went back, the caves were gone. GPS coordinates led to solid ground. One student, Maria Torres, kept a vial of water from inside. The lab analysis said the isotopes were impossible, elements that don't occur on Earth, molecules that had been frozen and thawed thousands of times in seconds. Maria began dreaming of the cave. She could see herself and her friends still down there, still smiling, still taking notes, like the versions of them in another layer had decided to stay. She stopped sleeping after that. Park Ranger Timothy Nash isn't a man who startles easily. He's seen storms chew campsites down to bones, and bears rearrange trucks like toys. But even he says there are moments the mountains stop pretending to be wilderness. We're trained for rescues, for keeping people safe from what they can see. We're not trained for the kind of silence that watches back. He talks about radio frequencies that broadcast on bands no human equipment should use. Voices speaking in languages nobody can trace. He talks about a distress call from himself, his own voice calling for backup from coordinates he's never visited. And once, he won't say where, he found his ranger hat at a 1976 crime scene, complete with badge number and sweat stains, 20 years before he was born. His eyes go flat when he says the last incident made him understand why some secrets stay buried under national parks instead of behind museum glass. When you map all the stories, the lost, the found, the not quite human echoes, a pattern emerges. The clusters line up with quartz veins, magnetic irregularities, and underground rivers. When those systems shift together, after an earthquake, during a solar storm, or under certain barometric pressures, the incidents spike. Physicist Richard Ellington calls it the frequency theory. Reality's a station, he says. Most of the time we're tuned to one channel. The Smokies are where the dial slips. You catch fragments of the other channels, versions of the same place where different outcomes kept happening. The Cherokee knew this. The settlers sensed it. Science is just late to the language. The Russell family stumbled across themselves in July 2023. 2 parents, 2 kids, mirrored exactly down to the mud on their shoes. They froze, looked, and silently agreed to pass each other like reflections, pretending not to recognize their source. When they looked back, the other family was gone. Security footage from the trailhead shows only one family entering and leaving, but the timestamps don't line up. One set leaves 20 minutes before they arrive. Historian Margaret Tremble has built a database of over 400 such events. Disappearances, echoes, misaligned dates, impossible artifacts. She's mapped them across a century and found mathematical recurrence. Sightings and vanishings follow a rhythm, a slow pulse like a heartbeat under rock. The mountains are speaking, she says. We just don't know the grammar yet. In the 1970s, there were 3 or 4 major incidents each year. In the 1990s, that number doubled. Since 2020, it's almost monthly. Whatever's happening isn't winding down. It's learning how to show itself. 6 weeks ago, a commercial pilot flying over the park reported a tower that doesn't appear on any map. A structure 200 feet tall, shimmering between stone, metal, and something transparent. 17 witnesses on the ground saw it too. None of their photos align. When software tries to render them into a 3D model, it crashes, returning only symbols no human language uses. The park responded by closing every backcountry route near the sighting, citing environmental recovery. Cameras that once monitored wildlife have been quietly removed. Research permits revoked. It's as if someone has decided that some truths should not be observed at all. But the mountains don't care about observation bans. The fog moves where it pleases. Every attempt to hide what's happening just makes the silence shift somewhere new. The Smokies remember. They were the ocean floor before they were peaks. They will remember us as fossils. Former ranger Sarah Dutton said it best before she disappeared from public life. Whatever intelligence is here isn't evil or good. It just is. The mountain watches us with the patience of stone and the persistence of time itself. And now we circle back to where it began. The couple who first reported Marcus Hollet's distress call about the abandoned vehicle were never identified. The car's owner, Robert Denning, 42, accountant from Knoxville, was found 3 days later at home. He insists he never left. Security footage shows him entering and exiting his apartment building as normal. The GPS from his car, however, logs a full day of travel through the park. Inside the vehicle, his possessions, his fingerprints, his DNA. His phone still recording when found, footage of trails he swears he never walked. Voices discussing events that hadn't happened yet. In the final frame before the battery dies, there's a glimpse of a man who looks exactly like Denning, but older, walking into a forest that doesn't exist on any map. 3 weeks later, the phone calls started. Every night, 11:17 p.m. The caller ID read his own number. The voice on the other end was his. Same cadence, same breath, but saying things he never remembered saying. Warnings about trails he'd never hiked, describing accidents that hadn't happened. Then they did, exactly as the voice promised. Denning changed his number 4 times. He moved states. Still, at 11:17, the phone rings. He doesn't answer anymore. The voicemails pile up, each one more urgent. Each one saying the same thing in a tone that's almost pleading. They're waking up. Time's folding. Some places are meant to stay lost. No one knows who or what is leaving those messages now. The investigation remains open. The questions multiply like echoes in fog, and the mountains keep their secrets, patient as stone, older than memory, humming softly to themselves. Maybe that's the truest thing about the Smoky Mountain Hollows. They've never been just one place. They're every version of themselves that ever was or will be, layered together like a song we only half remember, still waiting for someone to listen long enough to learn the rest of the tune.